you, Debbie. I actually have to introduce my two formidable first guests, Amber Valletta and Aditi Meyer. Please welcome them on stage. Are we sitting on this gigantic sofa all together? Yeah. Can we? I can be in the middle. I don't want to be away like that. Like, can I see? Can we see like this? Is it? Are we allowed? A little bit. It's more intimate, right? So I'm very happy to launch today this GCFA Green Card Professional Awards talks because sustainability, as we all know, it's in fashion as well as in many other sectors, is a very, very complex issue. It's not one thing. It's not only about climate justice, it's about social justice, it's about so many other things. And I've been an activist, I can say all my life, but I've been an activist for many, 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 many years. And I remember the first time that I stepped on a red carpet in 2010 at the Golden Globes wearing sustainable fashion, and everyone started to talk about the issue. I was like, okay, if you want fashion, I'll give you fashion, but we're talking about the same stuff. It's like, it's about human rights, it's about, environmental rights. And then through the years, I learned the power of celebrities and, the red carpets, which are the biggest communication platform in the world, to start talking about some very serious issues. And as someone said, I can't remember who in the young activist panel on the new narratives, it's all about the people behind the clothes that we wear. And these people and these stories are never told. So how do we reconnect the people that buy clothes to the stories of the people who make the clothes? And the power of celebrities and influencers in this is monumental and fundamental. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you two, because you both have done it in different ways for a long time. And I would love to know about your personal journey and because each one, none of us is perfect, by the way. We all tried and got it wrong sometimes and then got it better. We traveled the world and learned new things. And so what was the moment for you, Amber, that started this whole thing, that you realized that there was something more about fashion than just the clothes? And what have you learned throughout the years?
So when I was modeling in the 90s, I kind of felt a discrepancy. And I didn't actually know what it was. I just felt this my internal compass just was saying something isn't right. And at the time, the industry was very small. It was nowhere near the size it is today. There wasn't really even fast fashion. Of course, there were a lot of, kind of small vendors making things, but you did have people like Ralph Lauren who had started doing that kind of mass, bigger production. And when I stepped away for about a decade to have my son and I started acting, I started getting into environmental activism here and started doing things like lobbying and, educating myself about the environment and conservation. And when I decided to get back into fashion, which I'm not really sure why I did that, but I was turning 40 and I was or actually it was even before that, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the next period of my life. And it was fashion. It came back into my life, and I knew that I couldn't do it the way I was doing it before. And they had started talking about the environmental issues, but they were pointing overseas. They weren't actually making it sound like we were doing anything. It was just like, it's kind of over there. It's their fault. And with a friend of mine, we started kind of crafting a plan and based on values first. And so I used that lens, and one of the values was sustainability. And so I knew from that moment on, anything I would create or do would have, a set of values that I used to look through and to create anything, whether it was a brand or my activism or my modeling jobs. And so I went back into the industry and saw how many problems there were through the supply chain on every level, whether it be worker rights or human rights or diversity issues or climate issues and environmental and animals. And it was like, okay, I know where I'm supposed to be. My passion is this work, and yet I'm a storyteller and a fashion, model. So I thought, okay, there's a chance to make a real impact here. And that was kind of the genesis, long and short.
And what is one of the biggest lessons that you learned? What was the thing that surprised you most, that you really didn't expect it?
I think at the time when I started this journey, I was surprised at how little anyone knew. There was such a small circle of us. And I mean, I met you quite early on in this work. And there was just, it was few of us talking about it. Couple hundred, and some scientists and some activists. And it just was very, no one in fashion was talking about it, nor even paying attention to it. It wasn't on their radar. And every time we mentioned it, people were just like, what? And even investors, that was a big one. Investors would look at us like we were speaking another language. They'd never heard it. Sustainability, what? Environmental, what? Garment workers, it was over everyone's head. And I kept saying, this is how business is gonna go. This is how business will go, and it won't just be about fashion. It will be about every industry, because this is the biggest change we'll need to make in our lifetime. Yeah. So I think that was the biggest awareness for me, was just how little everyone knew, 12, 15 years ago.
Which is very true, because it is true. We started at the same time. And because the beauty about fashion is that it's a fantastic lens through which to look at the problems in the world. Because when you talk about fashion, you talk about an all-encompassing industry. You talk fashion, you talk about agriculture. Mm-hmm. You talk about deforestation. You talk about desertification. You talk about water scarcity. You talk about poverty. You talk about women inequality. The list goes on. Mm-hmm. And also what you said at the beginning is very true. Fashion is also one of the biggest exemplar of the divide between global north, where we all consume, and global south, where we not only produce, but all the crap that we don't use anymore, mm-hmm. we send it back there. Mm-hmm. I made a documentary last year. I was shocked. I interviewed a designer in Cantamanto market in Ghana. And only in Cantamanto, 15 million garments a week arrive from our second-hand mm-hmm. industry. Mm-hmm. And someone else the other day told me, as an insider, that H&M and Mango combined have 20 billion worth of stock that they don't know what to do with it. And so it's a monumental issue. And one of the things that I love about you, Aditi, is that, I don't like particularly the word influencer, but in your case, I love it, because you decided to use it in the right way, to use social media for what every single one of us should use it, which is the power to affect change and influence in the right way. So since the beginning, you sat on this journey, and tell me more about your story.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Aditi Meyer. I'm a sustainable fashion content creator, a photojournalist, and labor rights activist. And my genesis in this world started in 2014. It was a few months after the Rana Plaza factory collapse. And I know this was a big moment in your journey. So for those that are not familiar, Rana Plaza was an 8-story garment factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh, producing for some of the world's biggest fast fashion names, the H&Ms, the Mangos you mentioned. And structural cracks were found in this factory, and it was ordered to evacuate. But there was so much pressure from upper management to have workers complete orders that they were called back into work the next day, which set the stage for the biggest industrial disaster of our time. And for me at that time, I was just about to start my undergrad career. I never identified as someone with the passion for fashion. I was a photographer, I was a storyteller. And I knew the power of visual culture, especially through fashion. But what Rana Plaza did for me as a young woman, the daughter of immigrants, a South Asian woman, was really unpack the politics of labor, the disproportionate impact on people, especially women of color globally. The environmental impact of fashion, which again affects the same communities. And there was a lot of themes that I saw come out of Rana Plaza. I would say the knee-jerk reaction following Rana Plaza was conscious consumerism, very important. But the mainstream narrative that we saw was vote with your dollar. And for me, as someone from a low-income background, the daughter of immigrants, as I mentioned, to reduce the whole action that we can take to vote with their dollar limits not only how we can participate, but who can participate. I wanted to know the conditions that set the reality for Rana Plaza. How do we have a system predicated on speed and scale at all costs, even human lives? And so that led me to this path of understanding the history of fashion's ties with colonialism, how fashion compounds every other inequality in our world today, racism, how the industry has built with this idea of sacrifice zones, right? Going to vulnerable populations around the world, countries and cultures that have been destabilized by colonialism, to create fashion industries that are built on the exploitation of labor and landscapes. So long story short, I said conscious consumerism is important. It's a big part of my platform, but I can't talk about sustainable fashion without addressing the beast that is fast fashion. So I started organizing in downtown LA alongside garment workers, challenging this idea that labor exploitation was this distant abstraction. I knew it happened in LA. I knew it was tied to undocumented immigrants. And that has led to a beautiful 5, 6, 7, I don't even know how many years now, journey of building community. And there is a role we have as consumers, but there's an even bigger role we have as citizens. And to answer your question about influencers, I think a lot of the celebrity and influencer identity is predicated on this aspirational identity that we need to interrogate, right? Influencer culture is rooted in disposability, single-use outfits, I call them. You wear it one time, no one can see it again. But why do we create and what do we aspire to and how do we kind of reimagine that? I think the other part of social media is social media has democratized who we pay attention to. And as a woman of color, it was important for me to inject my culture, my aesthetics in a very whitewashed industry as well. So I will pause there, but that's a little bit about my genesis story in this space and the questions that guide my work.
No, but it's interesting because we'll touch on this also in the second conversation with Christopher, who just saw he arrived. Hi, Christopher. But sustainability is about so much more. And when you talk about, I love that Leah Thomas made this intersectional environmentalism. It's like it's all intersected. It's all about, equality and diversity and inclusion. Because until we treat the people who produce our clothes at the beginning in a completely different way from us, until we treat their lives as if they are disposable, but ours are not, until we think that it's democratic for us to buy something for $25, but it's not undemocratic for them to have to produce it for 5p. Nothing will ever change. And this is also going back to the power of, another word that I hate, celebrities. It's like to start talking about this. And it's true, social media is made for, aspirational. But what will it take to make it aspirational, to be environmentally and socially conscious? Like, what are some of the conversations that you had with your colleagues, for example, in the industry, both in the fashion and in the movie industry?
I think, no matter what, designing with purpose and designing things that are desirable. So, that's always been a big part of the conversation is like, there's no point in making things that nobody is going to be attracted to. So make less, make with purpose, making with the right materials, investing in innovative materials. But we always just said, the big thing was like, things still have to be desirable. We want to put it against anything that's going to be out in the world. And we want people to make the better choice because it's made the right way. And there was thought and care behind it. But I think it's still about re-educating people ultimately, and raising awareness. And I think what the power of celebrity can do, and the power of an influencer like yourself can do, is that we can showcase and speak about and educate, this change that we need to make throughout the supply chain. And so it has to be desirable and presented that way, but in the same token, we have this enormous responsibility and power, I think, as people who have platforms, to share all of the things that we've learned. And I try to keep it, I do things to put myself on the line, but at the same time, I try not to make people feel bad, because I think if you make people feel bad, they won't come in. 100%. But we still have to educate people. And so the key is really having all these different types of people talking about this, because everybody has a different way of sharing it. And, having young people and having people from all over the world and showing what matters to them in this change that we need. And I think that is actually what's going to make a difference, because you can be a micro-influencer and influence a small community, and it's just as powerful as if you have, 100,000 people following you.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I agree on the fact of not to make anyone feel bad. Apart from fast fashion, everyone should feel
but I
bad.
mean individually.
No, but I'm joking.
Yeah.
But it's but also about, I think what I also observed is that it works really well in celebrities or people who have a big platform, is to take the followers or the fans on a journey with them. One of the things that doesn't work, and this is what you do really, really well, is that you never say, I'm perfect, look at me, I'm doing this, it's all organic, blah, blah, blah. You say, oh, I'm trying this, and do you think it works? Oh my God, I'm learning so much. And then people follow you and start to say, oh, if she does it, maybe I'll try it too. Because I think one of the biggest comments that I get and I notice is that people say, but where do I start from? What do I do?
Yeah.
So how would you answer that? When people ask you, what do I do and what do I buy, for example, what do you say?
Do nothing. I say go to your own closet and shop. Like remake things, reimagine what you've got. Yeah. And then be very conscientious of what you buy. And wear it, keep it. That's the other thing, is keep it. I've told, family members, don't shop there. Save your money and buy something that you're gonna keep. Like, I wear my shirts until they're gross, I'm gonna be honest. Until they need to become cleaning supplies. They're gross. And I just, you'll see me in this suit, I don't know how many times. I've had it for a year and it's vintage, and I'm gonna keep wearing it. And it's, I think our mindset has to change on what we put value in, and we also need to see the intrinsic value that this has. This was made from something in the earth, and it is made by somebody by their hands and their blood, sweat, and tears. And it's not disposable.
Yeah. 100%. And Aditi, what do you say when people ask you, but what do I do?
Yeah. I think I'm going to build on that. Rejecting disposability culture.
Yeah.
I think the project of fast fashion has been to alienate us from the source of where we buy things, where it comes from, and all the hands it touches, right?
Yeah.
And so to opt out of that is to opt out of trend culture. Cultivating a personal style is inherently sustainable fashion. Secondhand culture is inherently sustainable fashion. All of those things are so incredibly important because it becomes a conversation of not what do I buy, where do I buy, but a mindset. Mm-hmm. And I think sustainability as a culture is something that we really need to focus on because I think the amazing panelist on the ethical storytelling panel said this best, right? You're opting out of problematic narratives that we've been fed. And that's why diversity is so important. It's not just the cosmetic role of, more black and brown faces in a movement, but the modalities that expand what sustainability looks like. A large part of my personal platform is looking at fashion as a product of land and labor, because I think that's been lost. I come from a lineage of farmers and peasant movements is so deeply tied to fashion. We don't talk enough about that. We talk about labor exploitation, which we need to talk about, but we also need more solutions-based storytelling about artists and cultures around the world that have always championed slow production, sustainable fashion, small batches, right? And it's so deeply tied to culture. So I think my personal relationship with sustainability has really been exploration and reclamation of culture. One of the things I didn't mention in terms of the work that I do is in 2020, I was named a National Geographic Storytelling Fellow. The pandemic happened, but this Sunday, I'm going to finally start that journey in India, looking at land, labor, waste, and fashion, all the hands that we touch. And it's a professional endeavor, but it's a personal homecoming too. Thank you.
I love this because one of the things that I observed traveling like many different supply chains all over the world, but also at the same time having the privilege to go and visit incredible designers like Pierpaolo Piccioli and Valentino, and going to the atelier in Rome. And one of the things that I always thought is like, why the seamstress in the Valentino atelier is considered a goddess, and the seamstress in India that is equally skilled, if not more, in embroidery and stuff, is considered just like, nothing. And so this division, so if you are going on this exploration, it's so important to reconnect and also put a price back into the clothes that we wear. Because this is the other thing, and I'm sure it happened to you, and it happened to you. It happens to me a lot. And it's the thing about, oh, but you are so privileged. It's so easy for you to talk about this because you can afford to buy things more expensive. But let me tell you something. I am 52 years old. This year I will be 53. So when I grew up, fast fashion didn't exist. No. I could not buy cheap clothes. And I came from a family where only my dad worked and was 4 siblings. And I promise we had zero money, let alone for clothes. But we shopped in a different way. We saved. I remember starting working at 18 and saving for 1 year to buy a Max Mara coat. Guess what? I still have it. If I do the price per wear of that coat, it's cheaper than Primark or Walmart, So we have been you used the right word. You said the project of fast fashion, and it has been a social project to destroy our brain and make us think that we need to keep buying. And you know how much money we spend by keep buying crap and throwing it away? Millions, not only of our wallet, we spend millions on the lives of other people. So, but it's very difficult mind frame to change, because when you're older, like me, it's easy because I came from that background. So when I hear you talking, for me, it's all common sense. But for a 13, 14 years old, like we were talking with Harriet, Enrico, my chief strategy officer at EcoAge, she has 3 young girls, and they all think that they need to have something right now, immediately, and they don't even think. So how do you change this mindset?
I mean, this might be a better question for you because you're closer to that generation. I mean, you're way younger than I am. I mean, my kids are buying vintage because they think it's cool. And they are not into the trappings of brands. And in fact, I took my son to a fashion show recently, and he was horrified. Even though I was like, but this is a good one. And he was just horrified that they had displaced a neighborhood for the show. And he saw all the inequality. And I think, it's a much bigger topic than just fashion. The project of fast fashion is one thing, but the project of distraction in our society is a much bigger conversation. I think it permeates so much of the psychology right now in our world, especially Northern Hemisphere world, that it is causing so much damage. It's the phone, it's the constant, like, now you can get everything in your house to do this and that. It's like everything is just like so fast. And it's all about distraction. And as soon as we start settling and when we're in ourself and find that kind of center ground, like creativity comes back, empathy comes back, compassion comes back, connection comes back, collaboration, and we're not there. And I think it's hard to talk to someone who's here. And they're here right now because that's what we've been teaching them.
Yeah. And also because the brand, I think there's also a level in which, because now activism is starting to get stronger.
Yes, it's
and
being
people know more. Let's go in the metaverse. It's all about digital product.
God,
that's
I don't even wanna hear
sustainable.
that
Let's
word.
go in another. Web3 will transform everything, and it's so sustainable. So it's like it really is. That will be the project of distraction, the biggest one.
I
in
think
history.
metaverse is like the like evil of all.
I know.
I can't
I
even
know.
stand that
I
word.
know.
It's already old to me, by the way.
I know. It really is. But Aditi, how instead, because Amber said this is a question more for you, like how do you use your, obviously you use your platform and your power to do that, but what are the conversations that you're having with your peers, and how do you think you can change that mindset?
Sorry. I think there was a few elements that came out from that dialogue. One is the attention economy. Social media as a tool, right? We know right now, social media, I think, is one of the biggest drivers of fast fashion. There's also fast media, the sheer rate of information that we are consuming, the ads, the sponsored ads, like what are those preaching? The Shein hauls, right? And it's tied to what I said before of that aspirational image. So key takeaways there, social media culture and also aspirational culture. So I think it goes back to storytelling and marketing. Marketing, especially in fashion and beauty, has always been predicated, I think, in the last 10, 20 years around exclusion, around making people feel bad. You want to be cool, buy this item. That needs to change, right? Personhood beyond consumption. And that goes back to personal style, thrifting, all of those things. I also think the sheer rate that we're consuming both media and product needs to be challenged. And that also looks at a more critical look at algorithms, how even creators like me who are focusing on sustainability and slowness are still put at odds with the platform that always wants us to create, always educate. So I think the future for me is decentralization in every facet possible. What do I mean by that in practice? Fast fashion is rooted in mass production. I think we need less mass production and more production by the masses. That is what will allow us to have more ethical supply chains when we decentralize that. You think about the way fast fashion companies operate, CEOs are among the richest white men in the world. I want to say white men because it's important to note the racial dynamics of it, where it's women of color in the global south that are actually creating the pieces that are toiling away for cents a day. So that's the dynamics of the industry and our larger world that we need to interrogate. And so to decentralize that is so important. This idea of celebrity is also somewhat tied to a centralization of power. So how do we convert a culture from influencers for people that live a lifestyle you want of consumption versus thought leaders that push critical thinking, right? I'm saying a lot of key words, but I think it marks a shift of where we are and where we need to go. That exists. How do we facilitate the platforms to lend itself to that? How do we have more platforms like this that are accessible for the masses? Because I think a key conversation for me is I don't want sustainability to be rebranded and co-opted as something you could buy and something for the select few. Because we know that it's low income, especially communities of color, that have always inherently championed sustainability as an economic necessity and often cultural norm, and that's what we need to return back to. That also demands interrogating who we platform and why. It's where power lies in a culture. Let's look at that.
Thank you, Aditi. It's very, very true. But then when you were talking, I was thinking, oh my God, this is all again like the great hack and Cambridge Analytica and how they brought us to elect Trump and Brexit and all of that, and now they're doing it. Like, how do you use social media in a good way. Because when you have a brand like I thought, oh, coming out of the pandemic, I was like, oh, we really are, like, no one will want to buy this crap anymore. After 2 years that we've been locked down, we are missing hugs and friends. Who cares about clothes? And then Shein arrives. And it's like, how did that happen? Where do they come from? And it's like they drop 1,000 products a day or something like that. And when you go and study, yes. Huh? 4,000 to 6,000 a day. There you go. I mean, these numbers are alarming. But then when you start reading how they did it through social media to targeting micro-influencers and paying, including like, and I know this because I read it, but also it happened to my son's girlfriend. You know, she got targeted, and Shein was like, I'll pay a lot of money. I'll pay £1,000. That for a girl, a 16-year-old girl, you think, oh my God, this is so much money. So they start pushing that. Fortunately, she has a good mother-in-law, and she said, no, and F off. But it's like, how do we use, like, to break this is we need almost like, is there a philanthropist or a millionaire that could pay like a micro-targeting, like, can we pay all the micro-influencers $1,000 each to promote sustainable fashion? Can we do that? That could be a good thing. I want to open the floor to questions because I'm sure there will be many because, you know, you both said some incredible things, and it's always where the conversation like starts to be more even more interesting. So who wants to fire the first question? There are two. Okay. And then you.
I love, Amber, what you said about this. I thought during the pandemic we would all go into our closets and go shopping. And I realized, oh my gosh, there are things in here that I haven't touched for years. And normally I would think of, so give it away. But then I kind of went through it again and thought, this really could be my wardrobe for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm not going to say I'll never shop again, but it was a real wake-up call that, and that whole idea, they were talking yesterday, Amy and Carter, about investing in a mattress where you'll spend a third of your life, and that it's worth doing that. And as my daughter said, you can't do it when you're in college because you don't have that kind of money and you keep moving. But once you're in a position to be able to acquire things that are thoughtfully made, you can find out where they're from. They can become valuable assets to your life and something that you can use forever. And that whole idea about never wear the same thing twice if you're in the public eye, I think we all have to really work at finding those lovely things that you keep bringing back because they're worth something, and the people who made them are worth something, and they deserve our honor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy.
Do you mind passing them out?
Wait, no, I just wanted to make a comment. By the way, this is 15 years old, this jacket that I pulled from the pandemic. I went through my clothes, and I'm like, oh, my God, I have such great things. And I do have my dress from Asher's bar mitzvah. Just FYI.
And you can still fit into it.
I actually, maybe.
Well, first of all, thanks to all three of you for being amazing advocates for this for quite a while. Shein brings up something that I think is really interesting. We talk about Gen Z and young consumers caring about sustainability, caring about ethics, and yet you have a company that is raising money right now at a $100 billion valuation that's selling $2 to $3 t-shirts and $7 dresses. Changing consumer culture is a piece of the problem, but stopping bad actors and policy seems to be a much bigger piece of it. What are your thoughts on those two topics?
Well, I've been working on policy for a long time. And currently with EcoAge, we're doing a lot of lobbying at EU level on few policies that are coming. I know that Amber has a lot to say about this as well. One of the things that actually, personally, what I'm very proud of is talking about, the title of this talk was The Butterfly Effect. And my butterfly effect was that the last time I went to Bangladesh with Harriet, it was 2015, was 2 years after Rana Plaza, to see what had changed. And I met a lot of garment workers, and a lot of them started to unionize. And a very, very strong union leader called Nazma Akkar said to me, said, Livia, nothing will ever change unless there is a transnational agreement on wages. Because until then, brands will start hopping from one country to the other in pursuit of the cheapest possible production line. So I came back to London, and I'm part of an NGO called The Circle that Annie Lennox founded many years ago. And within the circle, we have a very active lawyers, pro bono lawyers. And I met 3 of them, and one of them is one of the top human rights lawyer in Europe. And I said, do you think it's even possible? She said that. It's like, is it possible? And she was like, I have no idea. And the beauty of launching a challenge to lawyers, particularly women, they don't stop until they solve that. So 5 years later, not only for the first time in history, they basically proved the legality of a living wage as a universal human right, but they created the first legislation proposal on this. And we submitted it to the EU Parliament last year. And now there are conversations around that. If there was that legislation, fast fashion will end. It will be done because you can't produce those clothes at those volumes and that is why I'm a huge, not only advocate for legislation, but also a huge advocate for social comes always before environmental. Because if you take care of the people, you have automatically taken care of the environment. Even basic things like chemical use in a factory. If you look up after the workers, you wouldn't be able to use the chemicals. So it's so basic, and we forgot about that. But you are very passionate about legislation. You have been very active, and there are a couple here in America that are very looking positive.
There are. You probably want to speak to SB 62 here, but I'll let you speak to that. But they're also trying to pass legislation in New York State called the Fashion Act, which will only affect brands that make over 100 million a year. So anyone who's below that won't necessarily be affected, but I think perhaps could have some positive change. But it will look through environmental and social issues. There's still more work to do on that. And then Senator Gillibrand brought fabric up to Washington recently, and that is only about workers' rights and bringing garment workers or garment factories back here into the United States, and different types of tax incentives to do that, and again, talking about fair wages. And so I'm not sure if they're going to add any environmental aspects to it. I hope so, but maybe you know more about it, because I know there are kind of some links with SB 62 here.
Yes, going back to storytelling and like the stories that guide culture, I think one of the shortcomings of the sustainable fashion conversation is fixating so much on individual action that we lose the importance of systemic overhauls, which is what we need. So a few different things. I think one thing that I haven't seen translate to a policy level is conversations about degrowth. We have to talk about the sheer scale that fashion is operating it on, because you look at the Rana Plazas of the world, scale is what set the conditions for a culture of speed that came at the cost of human lives. So degrowth is a conversation that I think the industry truly needs to really jump on, because planetary boundaries, human rights is so entrenched in that conversation. My work on the policy and organizing side has been mostly with labor in downtown LA. And for those that are not familiar, LA's second biggest industry is the cut and sew garment industry, employing at least 50,000 individuals, which is probably a gross underestimation because it's a largely underground informal economy. Garment workers here have been resisting for decades, but this last year they won a legislative battle to pass the Garment Worker Protection Act, also known as SB 62. And yes, it's worth a clap. But what SB 62 did is it eliminated the piece rate, which was legal in Los Angeles, meaning workers were paid per piece they make as opposed to the hour. A piece rate that was even as low as 2 to 3 cents. So people were making $5 to $6 an hour in LA. And the worst, violators of wage theft were the Fashion Novas, the Forever 21. So that was huge. And you mentioned the Fashion Act, which is essentially the Garment Worker Protection Act, which is specific to California, being brought to a federal level. So it would eliminate the piece rate in a federal national capacity. It would create accountability measures between retailers, brands, and manufacturers. One of the stories that I saw in my work documenting garment worker narratives was 4 workers who were collectively owed $800,000 from Ross Dress for Less. $800,000 between 4 workers. And this wasn't an empty claim. It was a case they took to the labor court and won. But what Ross said was, that's the factory's fault. The factory said it was Ross's fault. No sense of accountability. So it would address that. And also, as you mentioned, $40 million towards domestic reshoring efforts and tax credits to create a more ethical industry. What I will say is this is all amazing, but we also need to talk about the fashion industry offloading externalities, human rights violations overseas. The global race to the bottom, the idea that brands are producing as much as they can, as fast as they can, as cheap as they can, has been what fast fashion is predicated on. That's why we see them going to countries that are reeling from impacts of colonialism. So transnational actions are so important because this is the colonial racial capacity of fashion. It is always preying on the most vulnerable communities. And that's why we can't have a conversation about sustainability without racism and colonialism. So I encourage you to, center folks that do talk about that because it's so, so important to this conversation.
Thank you. We have time for another question or two, depending on how long the answer is.
Hi.
Hi.
So, just speaking about transnational, activism and things like that. The issue on the opposite end is in the ethical fashion industry is that sometimes we see like those one-for-one advertisements or, white-owned sustainability brands being like, oh, we're making this amazing sustainable brand with like people in Africa and then put African kids like in their advertisements. It's very like white saviorism. And so how do we make sure that like ethical fashion brands aren't replicating the same systems around colonialism in their narratives and storytelling and actually building, reciprocity in their narratives and storytelling and practices?
Yeah.
Yes, Christy.
I think this is what you're talking about is how do you switch from cultural appropriation to cultural appreciation, and how goes back to what we've been saying is like one of the big problem is that, is the division between designers or brands and producer. They don't work in partnership, they work in servitude. So how do you reestablish that connection? And I think with Christopher in the next panel, we'll talk a lot about that. This year at the Green Carpet Fashion Awards, we awarded a wonderful designer that actually invited, and unfortunately she couldn't come, Bethany Yellowtail, which her brand Be Yellowtail. She works with the Cheyenne tribe and population, and she actually created a blueprint for this cultural appreciation and how you work, with indigenous communities wherever they are, or with the, African women cooperative. There are plenty of brands like this, Zazie Vintage. I can think of many. And I think at the base of it, there is how do you distinguish the greenwashing from the beautiful storytelling and true. And there is a lot of beautiful storytelling. And you can spot the greenwashing pretty easily, I think, now, right? We have become quite astute into that, aren't we?
Yeah, I think, this was something I saw very early in my sustainable fashion journey is brands that are using the language of ethics and sustainability, but their visual marketing created this binary between the black and brown producer and the white consumer. And so I think this goes back to how power is viewed in sustainable fashion and how do we make a more equitable culture. So I think, I always say that, like, we can't change a culture with the same culture that created it. So that goes back to conversations about racism, how producers are being positioned. And if we place all the power on the consumer or the model being, the end all be all, it's going to create this disproportionate impact there. So focus on producers as the artisans they are. Celebrate from what they are, not just hands producing some woven bag, because I see a lot of that. The erasure of humanity and the focus on labor and production and output. So tell more holistic stories of who these people are.
Yeah, and also it's important, that to remember that here too, the word sustainability, how do you sustain this in time? Because there are some brands who try to do this, in a very honest way, collaboration with a cooperative in another country, whether it's in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Africa, wherever. But then how do you switch it from being one-off, which actually you are exploiting the cooperative, the community anyway, because even if you do it beautifully, do it for once, to sustain it in time. And in that, I know that the brands who have tried to do that, which are usually the smaller brand, then need to learn how to tell the story in a beautiful way for the consumer to appreciate it and buy it. Because if we by being fueled by fast fashion and everything cheap, these collaborations are not cheap. If you want to make them well, and you have to pay the artisans in the right way. These clothes will cost much more. So it's complicated. We go back into that cycle of how do you go into appreciating also and keeping the clothes, like what Amber was saying, forever, rather than investing in that piece because that story is so special. And then you will keep supporting because, the more people buy, the more, you support these local communities.
Yeah.
We finished. It's 000. Jesus. Okay. Well, thank you. I am a very privileged person because I could talk to this too. So thank you so much.
Likewise.
And, to be continued, there will be many more. Thank you, Debbie and Emma, for giving us this platform to have these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, thank you so much.